What more? No?
Good afternoon, everyone.
Session
Welcome to this session in the Spanish Pavilion.
Okay.
First of all, let me welcome everybody in a multilingual context. I will be speaking English, which is a representation of the fact that we have people from different contexts, but I do want to acknowledge that we are in the Spanish Pavilion, and so should there be questions that you would prefer to ask in Spanish, please feel free to do that, and we will work our translations together. My name is Kirsten Dunlop. I am the CEO of an organization called EIT Climate Kick. We are Europe's leading climate innovation agency and community to develop solutions for mitigation of climate change and for adaptation. And what is most relevant to this session is that we are extremely proud to partner with the Spanish national government in the Cities platform, Cities ES, which is a national platform to connect up Spanish cities involved in the European Cities Mission and regions involved in adaptation and resilience measures, and to power up transformation that Spain is leading and showing a leading position on. And of course, adaptation and resilience are absolutely central to the concerns, to the questions, to the priorities, and to the opportunities that we have in the next decade. So this session is really about the urban experience, the urban environment, from the perspective of resiliency, given that we are facing a situation that is extremely confronting and challenging in terms of physical effects of climate change already hitting us, and the likely exponential increase and accumulation of effects. But most importantly for this discussion, it is about the notion of livability, of well-being. How do we bring about urban settlements for the future, for the present, immediate, midterm and future present, that are all about places of human sustainability, well-being, connection, survival in the richest sense, which is our opportunity to innovate and to change and transform the way we live, the way we relate to one another, the way we relate to our infrastructure, to our natural environment, and to our thinking about what it means to live and to be connected in settlements. We have a fantastic panel, very diverse, very rich perspectives. So let me quickly introduce. We will then have a discussion about one particular topic that we want to bring to the table with a number of different perspectives. We'll open up to more discussion. If you have questions and you would like to put a question in the last 10 minutes or so before 2 o'clock, please prepare those questions and think about it, because I would love to create some space for that. So let me introduce, starting from the end here, first of all, Gonzalo Durán-Barronti, who is the mayor of the municipality of Independence in Chile. And I am so curious about what that means, so that please weave that in to your response. Sabina Carluccio, who is the executive director of the International Coalition for Sustainable Infrastructure, one of our most biggest challenges. Sheila Patel, who is the founding director of the Society for the Promotion of Area Resource Centers and the creator of an extraordinary initiative called Roof Over Our Heads, and a global movement of change agents and actors, Catalyst 2030. It's definitely someone to talk to if you're interested in understanding how does innovation come from those closest to the challenges we are living with. And Eva Tortajada, who is studying architecture with a keen interest in architectural heritage and how vernacular architecture helps us learn how to live in more resilient and livable ways. And she is the winner of the Generación Clima Award with the Zalok project. And then I have a new entry. I'm going to have to ask you to introduce yourself.
Okay.
A little bit.
I'll be translating Mayor Gonzalo Durán. We had a little bit of a misunderstanding, so I'll be here.
No problem. Now, the only problem is that I'm finding it very hard to hear you. So maybe if you put this closer.
Okay.
But also, please introduce yourself, because it's no good being a nameless person, otherwise known as a translator.
Now you can hear me,
yeah,
right?
now I can hear you.
I'm Carla Germani. I work at a consultancy called Manuya, and also for the Climate Champions team, which supports the work of high-level climate champions, in this case for COP28 and COP27.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. And thank you for helping us. Okay, so we're here to talk about resilience and well-being. Perhaps if I create a little bit of a frame, here we are in the context of the 28th COP. If you think about how many years it takes to transform the world, 28 is a bit of a worry when you look at how much progress we are making. And think about the things that have transformed so much about the way we live did not exist 30 years ago. The phones we have, the applications, artificial intelligence, the way we think about nature, biomimicry, these are things that have come in the last 10. And yet in this negotiation process, we are here still now for 30 years. So we have some reflection to do on how we shift gears in our ways of thinking. But at the moment now, we find ourselves in a new challenge. The race we are in is a race now against despair, against the very real possibility that conflict and crisis accumulate more and more, that the effects of climate start to cause more and more breakdown of social fabric, stability, economic reliability, political stability, and that we really find ourselves in a situation in which it's harder and harder to act. That's extremely worrying if you think about how difficult it already is to act in a relatively stable environment. So the question of resilience starts to become extraordinarily important, not only as a political agenda or a policy agenda, but as something that has to do with fundamental capabilities, individual, collective, social, infrastructural. In Europe, there are a number of critically important commitments to large-scale transformation in cities in particular and in regions, looking at how do we accelerate the pace of change, the scale of change, so that we can learn and learn fast and share that learning and generate examples and create the precedent that we need to unleash and mobilize much faster change. And a lot of that learning is about how we combine reducing emissions with adaptation and resiliency. But one of our biggest challenges is a deficit of imagination. What does it mean to live sustainably and well in cities of the future? Do we have mental images of that strong enough, compelling enough to take us forward towards that? Or are we still living with a bit of a grey, black, whited image? We don't really understand what that looks like. We're focused on what we have to stop or let go of, but we haven't yet depicted in our minds resilient, livable well-being in a sustainable world. What does it look like? And who has the ideas for that? Who has the energy, the creative inputs for that? This panel is about that. It's about who has some of those perspectives, who can play what role, and how do we bring those puzzle pieces together quick enough to start to give ourselves ahead in this race against impact, change, and fear. So I'm going to start, I think, with Salvina, if that's okay. So here, I have a question for you, Salvina. You're working in infrastructure, the built environment. This is about the core, some of the most difficult things to change and some of the greatest opportunities. Do you think that taking charge of climate risk and this challenge that we face from the private sector would really bring benefits for life in cities? How could the private sector show leadership in this?
Thank you so much for this question. So I think one of the problems is that we really need to kind of operate at speed and at scale. I mean, we just don't have any time to think about what we're doing. And so I think the private sector is, I think, a key actor here because they've got the resources, they've got the innovation, they've got the speed, and they've got solutions. So I think private sector really can take leadership in this space. There are certain things, obviously, you mentioned technology before. I mean, we are never been in a better position with technology than we are now, with access to artificial intelligence, but also more geospatial data, better weather forecast, all this kind of resources and opportunities that we didn't have before. So obviously there is still, I think, a bit of a challenge sometimes to translate the science into actionable things to do. And what does that mean? What do those kind of models, projections mean? How do you actually put them in practice? I represent specifically the infrastructure sector, but specifically the engineering community globally. Engineers do still find quite challenging translating the climate data into climate-informed design parameters that then apply in their work. And codes and standards are quite behind, unfortunately. So, like, engineers tend not to do too well when it's not in the standard. They just don't tend to think about outside the box too much, and this needs to change. This is something that I'm advocating for in the engineering community. You kind of need to push the boundary of this. So there's the innovation aspect. There is obviously the insurance sector, also a private sector actor that has got a crucial role here. And again, in providing that sort of line of safety when disasters strike, and it's becoming more and more challenging now, to have assets and infrastructure and property insurable. So this is something that, again, a barrier and a potential challenge in the future where, again, I can see engineers and the built environment practitioners having a role in working with the insurance sector and provide more robust, more credible risk assessments that then can provide the insurance to stakeholders with a bit more confidence that actually they can still insure property and infrastructure, etc. There is also obviously advocacy and collaboration. I mean, the built environment practitioner cannot do everything on their own. Obviously, the working with policymakers, investors, insurers, I mean, that's key. This is something that is not really happening at the scale and level and that is required because technical experts are not always consulted very early stages of development of the built environment projects or infrastructure projects, and I think they can really bring value with their expertise, with their know-how, with their solutions. But then there is that sort of vision, like you can't really, maybe policymakers and sometimes investors, but policymakers I think is key. We need to better communicate what the solutions we already have are, and how to, and they can also sell them to their constituencies because, like engineers can have all sorts of solutions, but if the politicians that are on a brief 5-year funding cycle cannot sell them to their constituencies, then, those solutions don't really get implemented. Finally, one final point for me is private sector is a private sector. It needs to be profitable. I mean, otherwise it kind of doesn't survive. And I think, in implementation of sustainability, resilience, improving livability of cities, there are opportunities for the private sector. There is work to do. It's just the challenge is what are the best projects? What are the best interventions that will deliver the widest outcomes and to citizens? And again, that vision, visualizing, what does that look like? What are the solutions? How can we become better at communicating what the solutions are? Final point is that other than being profitable, businesses and the private sector need to be resilient themselves. So that there is an organizational resilience element to it because for example, some of the transportation agencies, at least where I live in the UK, are privately owned. So if that privately owned transport agency is not resilient, as in they don't have sufficient staff, they don't have the processes in place, they don't have the drivers to be sent to drive the buses, etc. Well, then that's the essential service of transport is interrupted, and there's no resilience.
And so there's a very interesting nexus there. You were reflecting on the importance of putting different elements together. I think one of the very unusual initiatives in the world is this the European Union, European Commission's commitment to mission-led, very large-scale transformation. And if you look, for example, at that commitment as decarbonization of cities in 7 years, by 2030, 112 cities. But one of the challenges is much of the assumptions about planning there are not necessarily yet taking into account the resiliency that the buildings, every aspect of transformation of mobility, the energy infrastructure and the built environment will need. And you were referring to insurance. I find that a particularly fascinating relationship, because if the solutions we put in place in the next 7 years reduce the risk of exposure to climate adaptation, it would keep insurance more affordable and possible. How is it possible to bring that kind of constellation, that sort of collaborative effect together, so that insurers are part of designing or incentivizing solutions in the infrastructure world that are more adapted and more predictive, and that the engineers and the constructions and the planners are really working together? What do you see as being perhaps the recipes for integration of those elements?
Yeah, it's everyone kind of knows that this is what needs to happen, and but we find it quite difficult, because unfortunately even the missions that we have are quite siloed sometimes.
Yeah.
But there is, perhaps in the European Commission, like in the Innovate for Cities, for example, as a mean to actually bring together climate action, where you don't just think about decarbonization of cities, but thinking about resilience and adaptation. So that could be a fertile ground to actually bringing together all those different actors that are not normally speaking to each other. So that's one vehicle that could be an implementation.
In fact, and of course, one of the interesting things for the private sector is collaborating in a pre-competitive way to really make this possible, rather than being trapped in we're all competitors, so we can't talk to each other.
And this is in this respect, my own organization has got this initiative. It's called Engineering Leadership Group, where we want to bring together the world's largest engineering private sector organizations. And as you say, I come from the private sector engineering. I worked there for 20 years as a practitioner. I've never seen large engineering firms collaborating before. But pre-competitive, and because it's an advocacy activity, we want to advocate for the role of engineers to the G20, to the G7, to the NFCCC. Well, that's might be possible. I can't be 100% sure that we will succeed, but we're trying.
Maybe we learned some lessons from COVID. Survival and sustainability are not a competitive sport.
Right.
Okay, thank you very, very much. Gonzalo, may I come to you? So I'm going to ask you a wish fulfillment question. If you could receive sufficient funds, what would you do to make an adaptable, adaptive, livable and resilient city? What would be your wish?
Primero quiero aclarar que pedí hablar en español porque me resulta más cómodo, especialmente estando en el pabellón de España. Creo que los municipios, los gobiernos locales, ya está muy dicho, somos los que enfrentamos en la primera línea, ¿no?, los impactos del cambio climático y los graves efectos que producen día a día. Y al mismo tiempo, perdón.
So, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Local governments are in the front lines of climate impacts. Yeah, basically.
Sí.
Yeah.
Pero al mismo tiempo, somos probablemente el órgano que más ámbitos del quehacer cotidiano de las personas puede impactar con políticas adecuadas en materia de cambio climático, tanto mitigación como adaptación.
So at the same time, with the correct public policy, you can affect people's lives, livelihoods in multiple ways, in different ways.
Y por eso lo primero que necesitamos, creo, es que no nos volquemos a ejecutar un conjunto de acciones sin que estén contenidas en una mirada, en un enfoque integral y sistémico que permita tomar todos estos componentes y efectivamente ponerlos en concordancia.
So you need like a plan, a holistic view, so you don't do actions like without this purpose, this plan for integrity.
por eso creo que es difícil decir, esta es la herramienta principal o el desafío principal, sino más bien cómo miramos el territorio en su conjunto, teniendo presente que tenemos responsabilidad en materia de transporte, en materia de construcción, en materia de gestión de residuos, en materia de movilidad sustentable, en materia de áreas verdes, solo por señalar algunas.
So there's no silver bullet, there's no one tool or one challenge. Local government or Independencia has multiple challenges like transport, buildings, waste, green areas, just to mention a few.
Y por eso hemos procurado, primero, generar una visión integral. Segundo, los instrumentos que permiten materializar esa visión integral. Necesitamos construir las alianzas, ¿no? Las colaboraciones para que esos instrumentos podamos efectivamente materializarlos y, por supuesto, junto a los recursos, capacidad de innovación, y me gustaría solo mencionar un ejemplo.
There's
we need to build those alliances that I mentioned, right?
to implement the instrument that they're working on, and he would like to mention just one example. Did I miss anything?
No.
An instrument that's really about collaborative integration of
Well,
collaborative
like
actors and
public
partnerships.
policy, or and also we need innovation.
Yeah.
Construimos en Independencia un bosque urbano con una metodología, Miyawaki, el primero en la región metropolitana de Santiago, y lo hicimos con recursos públicos y privados, con participación ciudadana, bajo el concepto de soluciones basadas en la naturaleza.
So, with public and private collaboration and financing, they built a green space with a Miyawaki method, like a nature-based solution for resilience.
May I ask you a question? Thank you very much. And I know it's super challenging to be trying to do simultaneous translation, so thank you. The instruments, so I actually also really hate being asked a question about what's the one solution, because when you are dealing with the complex reality of a city, it's all the solutions together. How do you see the possibility of changing the ways of working of a city to make it possible to integrate nature-based solutions, waste, water, energy, infrastructure, financing, policy? We know from the work we are doing, place-based innovation requires all those elements together. What is your sense in the policy and governance approaches, multi-level governance in the city, how to make a change in a way of working so that we can continue to integrate?
Entonces, ¿cómo ves la posibilidad de cambiar la forma en que se han hecho las cosas anteriormente? ¿Cómo se puede integrar naturaleza con financiamiento, con colaboración multisectorial y multinivel, gobierno regional, gobiernos locales?
Sí, cuando decía al principio la importancia de tener una visión, tener un marco normativo y tener instrumentos, permite de algún modo que todos tengan un marco común.
Yeah.
So, you need a vision, you need a regulatory framework, and you need instruments. So that way everyone is aligned.
En materia de financiamiento, por supuesto necesitamos que, junto con los recursos del sector público, haya un compromiso activo del sector privado y que seamos capaces de que lleguen efectivamente a los gobiernos locales de manera de tener mayor capacidad de impacto más rápido en los territorios.
Sorry. So you need public finance, but also private finance, and that finance gets effectively to local governments. So it has the speed and impact that we need.
Perdón, y creo que es muy importante involucrar activamente a la ciudadanía de manera que esto se vuelva una demanda frente a la cual deban responder colaborativamente los distintos actores en los distintos niveles e incorporando al sector público y privado. Si no hay una ciudadanía que empuja esas demandas, probablemente la respuesta va a ser más lenta y puede ser que termine concentrada solo en algunos actores.
It's very important to involve citizens, to involve civil society, so its demands can push for changes, and all levels of governance and even the private sector have to respond and have to respond fast. If not, we will not have the speed that we need and the impact.
Thank you very much. So this is when we start getting into the most difficult and interesting questions that we have. Because, of course, it depends who do we consider citizens and who is actually involved. And as more and more people are challenged by the climate effects, of course, that also becomes a greater population with less capacity to act. In Europe, we are experiencing something called fuel poverty, where suddenly we are finding people simply can't work out, can I afford to keep my house cool or warm? And that changes your willingness and your demand and the want you want and need from the city. And this is going to get more and more. So, Sheila, I'm going to come to you next. Now, I'm going to ask you first about cities are made of people. Cities are formal structures, but actually they're made up by our habits, our informal practices, the streets we walk along because the person we loved once lived there, or the streets we avoid because we broke up with someone who lived there. People are particular categories of people. Here we have you talking about women and informal communities, and Eva talking about young people. How do you see the role of women in helping cities shape a resilient and livable future?
Thank you. Just as a reference to why I can speak on behalf of women who live informally, is that I'm part of a global network called Slum Dwellers International, which works in 33 countries, mainly in Asia and Africa, but where women's collectives are at the center of making solutions. And this is what they say about themselves. Men in our neighborhoods are 100-meter dash runners. You want something done yesterday and it can be done, you ask the men to do. If you want to deal with difficult solutions that don't come easily, you have to give it to the women because they are the marathon runners. And so in the world of women who live informally in cities, they are faced with terrible realities that are almost 3 generations old. One, that most countries, both in the north and the south, believe that if you do good development in villages, people won't come into the city. And for the last 5 decades, this has been proved wrong, but that has not changed how education looks at development interventions, how planning, architecture, design, infrastructure investments are produced, and the reality of how entitlements of who has access to what gets defined. So you have people, we never called it climate-linked migration, but if you look at the last 50 years of people migrating into cities, they came because crop failures, intense weather, conflicts, all those kind of things which today we have names for. But that time it wasn't legitimate, it was not acknowledged, and cities had no place for people who came in that way. So the only thing they could do was squat near where they could find some work. And we all know, as upper class educated people in the global south, but also in the north, that we need lots of people to help us so that we can go to work as women. We know that. And we take that for granted, but we want them to be invisible. So in cities, in the global south, in Asia and Africa, 50 to 65% of people live illegally today. And the projections are that this will double in the next 10 years because we have already reached all the extreme weather predictions that we talked about as if it was in the future. We have not even touched significant percentages of people in the SDGs. We still have silos where if you are in, just now Deborah Roberts was saying that if you're doing any development investment, the climate investment says, this is not us. But for poor people, development and climate change is the same thing. And they have gone through these 3 to 4 generations of extreme poverty, extreme denial of basic amenities, and a decreasing voice in cities where many of our mayors feel compelled by the laws of the nation to treat them as illegal and therefore evictable. So you don't need a flood to produce losses and damages. Our cities produce that by destroying people's homes, assuming they will just vanish. Nobody vanishes. They have to start from scratch. And if you actually calculate how much money they spend in rebuilding their homes, it would make our international funds look shamefully less. So that's where we come from. And if these communities and their neighborhoods survive, it's because of this amazing capacity of women's collectives to collaborate, to be supportive, to assist each other, to see that none of their neighbors go hungry, that children are protected. And our simple solution of safe and livable lives are to say, does it work for our children? If it works for our children, it's okay for everybody else. So that's the starting point of the reality in the global south. And if you look at all development assistance, all of you are from, many of you are from Europe. Many European countries have colonies. Many of our own countries are colonies of different European and American and other countries. We follow all your rules and regulations in our countries, and we also find that our elite get educated in your countries and they learn the same exclusionary practices of high standards, as a result of which poor people are always unable to do anything. Their homes are useless, they have no infrastructure, they have nothing, and therefore the exclusion continues. And yet here we are talking about the bottom 40%, the 2 billion who have nothing, and nothing reaches them. They still depend on their own innovations, their values, their collaborative capacities, and that is shameful.
Thank you, Sheila. So there's a question then on...
Sorry to sound so depressing.
No, it is our reality. And there's a question then on defining who are citizens of the cities of the present and of the future. Also because we know we cannot afford, as a species, to have humans spread out. We need to be living in much more compacted, collaborative environments and make a better use of resources. So then the voice of hope that I hear you nonetheless describe is there is deep knowledge and deep practice of trust and collaborative survival and an understanding of resilience. And I think if I think about the European cities that we are working with, we are not prepared at all for what it will be like when we have millions of refugees, not even remotely prepared. So there is an enormous exchange. And I'm interested also in the experience in Chile, where you are already in a much more integrated or mixed context. How do we create lessons, reciprocal lessons, in a much more integrated understanding of survival, but a wider construct of citizenship? What does it mean to really enlarge our understanding of the human construct of settlement? Let me come to you, Eva. Now, I also wish to declare another discomfort, which is whenever I'm on a panel and I'm asked to speak or moderate and I'm told that one person is representing youth, this makes me extremely uncomfortable. And it makes me uncomfortable because I feel there is a tokenism in that. So I would really like you to reflect and challenge us on what we are in a world where voices of fear, uncertainty, concern, anger, and really bitter challenge are coming to us from populations, from millions of people, and we have something like 6.7 billion population unborn in the next 30 years, and we have a responsibility for them. And so often the discussion, the debate is, how do we partner in a way that is not tokenistic, that is real? What do you think the role of youth, young people of any, whichever way you want to define where those generations start and stop, should be playing in shaping the resilient and livable futures and urban settlements?
First of all, I appreciate the opportunity of bringing the youth to this round table. Youth must understand that our future is at stake here. These are our cities and it's our world as well. We should play an active role in decision making. To be able to do so, each one of us, within our own interests, should read and research to be aware of the problem we face and to be able to propose solutions. But if we don't get involved and act now, probably later it will be too late. The youth should raise awareness, engage in community-based projects, educate both older and younger generations about initiatives that promote environmental resilience, and advocate for innovative solutions to build resilient cities. The concern for our future had led us to change our way of thinking. Most of us advocate for a different lifestyle model than we've seen in our parents. We propose alternatives to transportation, such as using bicycles or public transport, reducing the private use of vehicles. Our generation is the age group where the highest number of people identify as flexitarians and vegetarians. We know that shopping at small neighborhood businesses support local producers and is more sustainable than traveling to large shopping malls. With all these examples, I mean that we are a generation very aware that things can be done differently from what have been done up to now.
Well said.
Our duty is to question the city models in which we live in and seek sustainable alternatives to adapt cities to the impacts of climate change. We know each solution is unique and it depends on factors of location, climate, cultural and economy of each country. However, some examples that I've worked as a youth member in projects in multidisciplinary teams alongside with other young people are, for example, promoting energy efficient renovation of the buildings to save on heating and climate and cooling, the naturalization of public spaces and streets to filter and collect rainwater, energy cooperatives as an alternative model for energy production and management in communities, and reinterpret and innovate about vernacular architecture that has evolved over centuries and adapted to local climate conditions, which can now offer sustainable solutions to the challenges posed by climate change. In addition, if we understand resilience as the ability to withstand, adapt to, and recover from various challenges and shocks, we can say that that is also a term that defines us, the youth. We are very well prepared to face the change. Youth should always be represented whenever decisions about cities are being made. We know what kind of city we want to live in, how we want to use this public space, how we want to move and connect with each other, and to achieve it, we must be considered as well. Our way of life, along with the proposals and the innovations we have, should inspire those who make decisions that there is an alternative path that is more sustainable and respectful to the world we live in.
Well said.
Can I ask you something about, you made a connection between intergenerational partnership, and I think this is one of the elements that I would love to hear more about. What could we gain from creating partnerships between the young and the old, where there are wisdoms, there is energy for living differently, and there are wisdoms sometimes actually reaching back, missing the last 50 years of some of the mess we've created. How do you see that playing a role in the youth movement?
I think young people still have, like, maybe it sounds like crazy ideas, but we are more provocative, and we have the strength to fight for things that probably older generations have lost because of the way of life and just living, and introducing us to those groups because older generations have the money, the contacts, but maybe we have the ideas. So combining both forces can reach a further place to those ideas than just having separate groups where older people have all the money and youth simply have the ideas. And we also need spaces to promote them. So I think it's really important to invest in the future and invest in the young talent.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, one of the people that I remember being really shaped by was a Swedish man who has a proposal that if you take risk appetite and age, you get a smile curve. So people in their 60s and 70s and 80s are beginning to worry about legacy, and they are very happy to take risks, and young people as well. But one needs energy and one has energy, and if you partner, it's the people like me in their 30s, 40s, 50s who are most afraid of change. And I was thinking that would be a way of change. Thank you. I also want to come back to this question of how to create that voice, and for that voice not to be a voice of advice, but a voice of ownership, of agency, of responsibility. But let me ask a question to all of you, and thinking very much about this. How do we give voice to women, voice to young people, voice to local councils and communities who are holding the responsibility of this, and voice to the private sector? What would be one of the most effective interventions? You have to think of one or two or three, like acupuncture points, that would help us create more livable cities from the get-go, from now, more resilient cities. What are the combinations? Let's just think how we put our collective intelligence together here. What would you argue for, and argue for here in every single pavilion you speak at next?
I'll make a start, because even though I'm an engineer and representing the private sector, I actually think we need to start from the people. I think, everyone, we talked about people a lot, and Gonzalo talked about how citizens need to kind of push the demand for change. But I think in that culture, or that connectedness of different groups within the population, and then what is the vision? What are we kind of aiming for? And also, what are the impacts that they're going to experience? Because you see that on the news day in, day out. People don't think that will happen to themselves. Infrastructure owner-operators don't fully understand what the risks are to their own assets. So I think there is that sort of resilience culture building activity and risk communication, risk and benefits communication, that I think is still there to be done, so that the citizens can ask for the change and can really push the politician to take action, and they will, because they will be under pressure to get their votes. So I think for me that's the end, from my own perspective as a technical person representing a technical community that is traditionally not the best communicator. Engineers traditionally are not very good communicators, but that needs to change. Let's go to the young people, and in fact we're working with the young engineers, because I think they need to be spearheading that change, because they can actually, in the new generation, are a lot better at communicating. Let's use that. Let's use that power, that communication, that passion in every the built environment, wherever they are, to just argue and advocate for change and explain what that means.
So resilient culture building skills, mindsets, a whole culture, but it's a much richer culture building, exactly, and communication. Thank you. Sheila.
I experienced something amazing yesterday evening. I met a young councillor from Sydney who said that his mayor compelled him to join the stand for elections, and she ensured that he was there in every single committee, and they have developed a tradition where they have an empty chair in which they say, and now I'm a citizen in 2050. What do you need to do today to make my life work for you? I thought that was such an interesting structural transition. Yeah. And the other fantastic thing that he talked about was that whenever they were doing any policy that had implications for future investment, they just brought representative young people from different sections along with older people and made them sit together and say, what do you want? It wasn't dependent on how much experience you have, how educated you are. You are the citizens. How can you take something that you believe you must have emotionally and transition it into something that is strategic, financially viable, and good for everybody? How do you do that? And one of the things that I realized is that this is not something that we have to dump on youth, like you saying, that they have to keep fighting for saying we have a right, we have a right. What about all of us? We shouldn't be just drowning in shame of what we have not done, but learn to say, okay, we screwed up, we made a lot of mistakes. Now let's look at how we do course correction. How can my experience, my networks, my knowledge work with you and produce that smile that you're talking about?
Yeah, so really tapping in, making much more deliberate use of our resources that are often right in front of us and we're not thinking about that. Gonzalo.
Yo creo que la clave es de verdad entregar más poder a las personas. Esto supone educar, comunicar con sentido de urgencia y, por cierto, a todas las generaciones muy transversalmente.
So, communication, cross-cutting communication.
No, darle poder a las personas.
Give power to the people.
Capacidad para implicarse.
And capacity to have incidence.
Que no, desde las instituciones, a veces estamos muy concentrados en las tareas que tenemos que hacer con sentido de urgencia, pero si involucráramos más a las comunidades y le entregáramos poder a las comunidades, probablemente eso ocurriría mejor y más rápido.
So public institutions are often caught by day-to-day tasks and problems. So giving power to communities can give you the solutions and the speed that you need.
Estamos ejecutando en todos los colegios de la comuna tratamiento de aguas grises.
So in all schools of the municipality, they have gray water recycling system.
Harvesting.
Y
Sorry?
Rainwater?
Gray.
No,
Great.
wastewater.
Wastewater.
But not like from bathrooms, but from washing hands or dishes.
Yeah.
pero involucramos a los niños en el aprendizaje del ciclo del agua. Esos niños hoy día tienen más conciencia y más acción en relación al cuidado del agua. Digo, si cada acción que hacemos involucramos a las personas, probablemente la profundidad de nuestra acción va a ser mayor.
So they involve children in this process. So children are now learning, and they are spreading this knowledge and how to reduce, how to take care of water, and in that way you can have more impact. You spread the word and education.
Thank you. So in fact, as Eva was saying, the more that you disseminate knowledge about ways of living differently, the more chance and hope we have. I was in New York Climate Week, and somebody suggested the best thing we could do would be lower the voting age to 12, put 1.7 billion people into the voting system. Then, of course, we've got to address where do they get educated and what lifestyles do they learn. Eva, what's your reflection on this?
I think for the citizens to get involved, the urbanism of the cities has to change.
Yeah.
Because there are not many places where citizens can reunite to speak about the topics and to decide about their neighborhood. And if we don't create spaces for these local communities to debate and to prepare their things they want to ask for the local governments, we are not facilitating this to happen.
Okay, that's
well said.
This is music to my ears. So we need fora in every sense: public, artificial, structural fora for dialogue and debate, for the uncomfortable conversations. Thank you. Okay, I promised there would be opportunities for questions, reflections. Anyone in the audience who's feeling passionate? If not, as you can hear, there's lots more to be said and thought about. Anyone would like to make a comment, a question, a reflection? Please.
Shall I do it in English? I don't know. Well, I'll do it in English.
We have a fantastic translator, so go for it.
So, we've been discussing about cities and more or less focus on the boundaries of a city, but actually a city is interconnected with the region and farther away with the state. So I would like, because I'm from Valencia, as Eva, and one of our problems is to try to stop the traffic before getting into the city. But we cannot do that because then it is outside the city. So I would like some reflections on how to coordinate efforts with supra-city organizations.
Thank you. Now that is a really dear topic. So let's start perhaps with you, Savina, on this whole issue, because very often, in fact, in the moment that we say systemic, we are still compartmentally talking about a city and not a region or a relationship.
Yeah, so that's it's a perfect reflection, and I think we touched upon this multi-level governance, which is obviously a multi-level action, right? So cities, as you rightly say, they're a system within a larger system. So I think it is. I do believe that giving regions, other than cities, regions a voice in fora is actually quite important. So because at national level, I think, translating national policies to cities in a local action is not that easy, but the regions could be a good intermediary that kind of like does a bit of a middle kind of man between the national policy and then in translating regional kind of policy or kind of regional actions, and then, have that dialogue about upwards and then with the cities. So that would be my reflection on this.
Thank you. Sheila?
I don't know about northern cities, but in Asia and Africa, the cities which are already metropolitan cities are becoming metropolitan regions. And what it's showing is that if the metro city governance is not linked to the regional governance. It just extracts things from the region. So in the city that I come from, Mumbai, in order for us to get water, all the villages around from where we bring the water get drought while we get the water, which is very unfair. So more and more of us are talking about metropolitan regional governance, also to address the challenge of rural and urban aspects of the city.
Yeah.
Because in where I come from, there are 12 municipalities along with Mumbai which are on 34% of the land of the metropolitan region. The rest is rural. If we don't look after the rural, we will not be able to breathe. But we are constantly pushing to expand the construction activity and destroying forests. So these are all new challenges that are emerging, and all in South Asia and East Africa, this is a very big problem because their volume of urbanization is growing very fast. It's also the two regions that have the maximum number of youth in the world in terms of percentage. Our old people don't know what to do with these young people.
So there's this really interesting challenge on how do we actually deliberately design policy for symbiosis, which means we need to learn from nature much more. Of course, in a European context, also here, we are beginning to learn the cost of not thinking in bioregions, but the Committee of the Regions, in fact, is here at COP and is one of the key elements of arguing for regions is where you can start to put this together. Gonzalo, do you have a perspective on this?
Sí, en el caso chileno tenemos muchos municipios y pocas autoridades con competencias a escala ciudad, a escala metropolitana.
So, Independencia is in Santiago, which is a big city, and there are many municipalities there, and they don't have incidents as a city, just a
They're
part
not
of it.
treated as cities.
Sorry?
Are they not treated as cities?
It's like a part of the city. The city is bigger.
Yeah.
So it's not
just eats them
a
up.
metropolitan the competences of the municipality are not metropolitan, but just a part of it.
Yeah.
Entonces cada alcalde tiene que pensar su parte del territorio, pero tenemos que ser capaces de actuar sobre esa parte y pensar a una escala más amplia, en que la colaboración resulta clave para tomar decisiones que trascienden el territorio específico.
So each major has to think about their size, their part, their area, and collaboration is key to think beyond their areas and have. ¿Cuál fue la última parte?
Que digo que tienes que actuar sobre tu ámbito, pero pensar en una escala más amplia.
Yeah. So act very, very local, but to have incidents on the surroundings that are not part of your governance.
Como hacerse cargo del impacto sobre el territorio contiguo.
So,
I need your address.
It's like an impact on adjacent territories.
Yeah, to analyze your impact in the adjacent.
So it's very similar to this notion of the collective interest. How are you constantly thinking of the single and the collective and the outcome of the whole? Eva, I'm going to give you the final word. We need to close.
Okay.
You challenge us to think about how do we bring young people into decision rights, and how do we change the design of what we are doing in cities so that those dialogue spaces are real. What would you leave us with as an exhortation for the livability of the world we are building?
What a pleasure.
Especially thinking of your architecture, this is your daily life, no?
Yes.
You can speak in Spanish if you wish.
No, I'm thinking about the question.
It's a tough question.
Yeah.
Maybe we give every time to think. What is each of us going to take from this discussion?
I mean, I think that the word that we all said in different languages is collaboration and talking to each other, which we're doing here at COP. That's why I'm coming to COP, regardless of why I shouldn't come to COP. That's why I'm coming, to have this conversation. But I think, our conversation needs to become more challenging. We just, we kind of reverting into our comfort zone of what people expect us to say. We don't challenge ourselves, we don't challenge others. I think that's what you said before, we need to be more provocative. And I'm guilty myself for not doing it. But I think that's what we should be doing, pushing.
And as you said, demand more from what we're doing. Mm-hmm. Yeah, Sheila?
I think for me the question of first of all, the question of informality and the acknowledgement that old-fashioned divisions of invisibility are not going to withstand what crisis we're going to face is very important. The second thing is that in politics, aggregation works. And we want to look at ways by which those of us who are voiceless, who we support, bring loud, noisy voices into this process. And the third thing is that we really have to develop a serious compact of working intergenerationally in equity, in excitement, and in being supportive, because those are new forms of negotiations that we are not familiar. We're locked up in, I am the old lady, you have to listen to me sort of thing. So these are all transitions, and we have to make them very quickly because they are the ones that are going to produce the kind of solutions we need for the future.
So new forms of negotiation, new forms of intergenerational partnership. Eva?
Yes. People have to know that change is possible.
Yes.
Possible. Because there is a lack of motivation in a great part of the society thinking that change cannot be possible. And we have to make aware that this is possible and that we can change the places we are going to live in the future. And for that, we have to regain the community spirit that we've lost with this globalization and industrialization world. And we have to go back locally into action groups for this to be possible.
Thank you. So then I'm going to connect to what Gonzalo said. So we need to give power to local communities to act local, but think of the world in the same moment. Thank you so much, all of you. Fantastic conversation. It's a privilege to be here.
Yep.